A racist police officer targets a black woman with hostility, using force to assert his authority. However, what he doesn't anticipate is her swift and powerful counterattack that leaves him stunned and exposed. The tables turn as the encounter is caught on camera, sparking outrage and calls for justice. Her courage becomes a symbol of resistance against abuse and prejudice, sending a clear message to those who misuse power. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us on this journey for justice. The scorching heat bore down as a tense confrontation unfolded. Officer Martin, a man whose commanding presence masked years of deeply ingrained prejudice, patrolled the supermarket parking lot. His eyes landed on a young black woman exiting her car. Without hesitation, his gaze narrowed. He approached with an air of authority, his intentions clear. The woman, Justice Evelyn Carter, exuded calm confidence as she walked towards the store. Her every step, deliberate and poised, caught the attention of passers-by. Martin stepped in front of her path abruptly, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Evelyn turned to face him, her expression neutral but unwavering. Martin demanded to know her purpose there, insinuating she didn't belong. Evelyn responded with measured calm, explaining she was there to shop like everyone else. Martin, emboldened by his authority, didn't relent. He accused her of trespassing and violating regulations. Evelyn, still composed, informed him she had every right to be there, her voice steady despite the evident hostility. The exchange drew attention, and a small crowd began to gather, phones in hand. Martin's frustration mounted as Evelyn's calm defiance challenged his authority. In a sudden escalation, he grabbed her arm. The crowd gasped, and Evelyn's expression shifted, not to fear but to quiet resolve. She pulled her arm free, her voice carrying a quiet strength as she asked him to release her. Unwilling to back down, Martin pushed further, accusing her of resisting. Evelyn, however, refused to be intimidated. She stood tall, her unwavering gaze meeting his, signaling that she would not be cowed. The tension reached a boiling point when Martin raised his voice, commanding her to comply. Evelyn refused, her dignity intact. The situation took a dramatic turn when Martin, overcome with anger, struck her. The crowd erupted in shock, and phones captured the moment. Evelyn stumbled but quickly regained her composure, her hand instinctively going to her face. Instead of retaliating, she straightened her posture, her expression one of profound determination. At that moment, Evelyn's quiet strength shifted the dynamics. A voice from the crowd called out, demanding Martin stop. The murmurs grew louder, and the officer, now aware of the phone's recording, hesitated. Evelyn, her voice steady but commanding, declared her identity. She revealed she was Justice Evelyn Carter, a federal judge. The revelation sent a shockwave through the gathering crowd and visibly rattled Martin. The arrogance drained from his face as the weight of his actions began to dawn on him. Evelyn, unwavering, informed him that his conduct would not go unchallenged. The crowd's energy shifted, the initial fear replaced by support for Evelyn and condemnation of Martin's actions. As law enforcement backup arrived, Evelyn calmly stepped forward, ensuring her presence was known and her story documented. Martin's colleagues, recognizing the severity of the situation, intervened cautiously. Evelyn's composure throughout the ordeal left no doubt about her resolve to see justice served. The crowd, emboldened by her strength, began to voice their support more openly, holding their phones high to capture every detail. By the end of the confrontation, Martin's fate seemed sealed. Evelyn, her dignity intact despite the ordeal, made it clear that this was not just a personal battle but a stand against a much larger issue. Her unwavering resolve and the evidence captured by the crowd ensured that this was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Naomi Harper sat at her desk, a thick file open before her. The evidence gathered in the first encounter with Mills had been damning, but it wasn't enough. She knew Mills was merely a small piece of a larger, deeply ingrained system of corruption. Her resolve to uncover the network driving him pushed her to work tirelessly, reviewing documents and connecting dots that most would overlook. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Vaughn, one of the key figures Naomi had identified, sat in his office, scanning a series of reports. His network had begun to feel the pressure of Naomi's investigation, and he knew she wouldn't stop. Vaughn's demeanor was calm but calculated as he reviewed contingency plans to ensure his operations continued uninterrupted. His phone buzzed. It was Brooks, his partner in the operation, calling to discuss their next move. Brooks' voice was tense, indicating growing concern. They agreed that Naomi had to be neutralized before she could gain more traction. At the same time, Naomi's ally, Marcus Reed, was working from the FBI headquarters. He was analyzing financial transactions linked to Vaughn and Brooks, tracing the money back to shadowy sources that connected to politicians and influential business figures. Reed's face tightened as he discovered a series of payments labeled as community development grants that were anything but legitimate. He immediately flagged the information and contacted Naomi, his voice tinged with urgency. Naomi's phone rang, the familiar voice of Reed pulling her out of her focus. He detailed the connections he'd uncovered, tying Vaughn to a series of shady businesses. This new information confirmed her suspicions. Vaughn wasn't just a corrupt cop, he was a linchpin in a network that extended far beyond the police department. Naomi's determination solidified. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a fight for systemic change. In a darkened room elsewhere, Vaughn's lieutenant, an enforcer named Kane, listened as Vaughn laid out their next steps. Kane's reputation for dealing with threats swiftly and brutally made him Vaughn's go-to man for situations like this. Vaughn instructed Kane to send a message to Naomi. Kane's cold smile was the only confirmation Vaughn needed. Naomi's investigation led her to Alicia Carter, one of Mill's past victims. Alicia's account had been heartbreaking, but her testimony held critical pieces of the puzzle. Naomi met with Alicia again, this time in a more secure location, to go over details. Alicia's reluctance was evident. She had been threatened before and didn't want to relive the trauma. Naomi's reassurance was firm yet compassionate, promising protection and justice. Alicia's resolve strengthened, and she agreed to testify if needed. As Naomi left the meeting, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Her instincts told her she was being followed. She quickly ducked into an alley, using her FBI training to evade the tail. The SUV lingered, but eventually moved on. Naomi's heart raced, but her focus didn't waver. She knew she was getting close to something, and the danger only confirmed it. Back at her apartment, Naomi found an unmarked envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a photo of her meeting with Alicia earlier that day, accompanied by a chilling note, "Stop now or you won't live to see tomorrow." Naomi's hands clenched around the paper. Fear bubbled beneath her steely exterior, but she refused to back down. She immediately contacted Reed, who insisted on increasing her security. "They're getting desperate," he said. "That means we're onto something big." While Naomi strategized her next steps, Brooks met with Vaughn in a private setting. Brooks' frustration was evident. "She's relentless," he said. Vaughn's reply was cold and measured. "Then we have to make her stop. Permanently." They discussed plans to plant false evidence against Naomi, aiming to discredit her and derail the investigation. Vaughn's connections ensured he could manipulate the narrative if needed, turning public perception against Naomi. The next day, Naomi's investigation led her to a warehouse on the city's outskirts, a location Reed had flagged as a potential site for illegal operations linked to Vaughn and Brooks. She and Reed staked out the site, noting suspicious activity. Trucks came and went under heavy guard, suggesting the site was a hub for the network's operations. Naomi decided to move in but knew she needed a plan. Reed and Naomi gathered a small team, coordinating a raid on the warehouse. The operation was meticulously planned, with contingencies for every scenario. As they moved in, the tension was palpable. The warehouse was heavily guarded, and any mistake could turn deadly. Inside, Naomi and her team discovered crates filled with illicit goods, weapons, drugs, and falsified documents. The evidence was damning, but they weren't alone. Guards spotted the team, and a firefight erupted. Naomi's training kicked in as she took cover and returned fire, directing her team with precision. The chaos was overwhelming, but the team managed to secure the site, arresting several individuals connected to Vaughn's network. As Naomi reviewed the evidence collected from the warehouse, a sense of accomplishment mixed with dread. The operation had been a success, but it also escalated the stakes. Vaughn and Brooks wouldn't take this loss lightly. Reed's warning echoed in her mind. They'll strike back harder than ever. Elsewhere, Vaughn received the news of the raid. His calm demeanor cracked for the first time. "She's more resourceful than I thought," he admitted to Brooks. Brooks' reply was sharp. "Then it's time to eliminate her." Vaughn nodded, already formulating their next move. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Naomi knew the fight was far from over. The network's reach was vast, and its leaders were ruthless. But Naomi's resolve only deepened. She wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting to dismantle a system that had oppressed countless others. And she wouldn't stop until it was done. Naomi sat in the dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of documents and flickering computer screens. The tension in the room was palpable as the investigation into Vaughn and Brooks' corruption network deepened. Every piece of information unearthed seemed to lead to more questions, tangled connections, and hidden secrets. Naomi's mind raced as she pieced together the puzzle, aware that time was running out. Meanwhile, Vaughn, in his lavish home office, was reviewing the latest updates from his contacts. His composure was strained, knowing that Naomi's relentless pursuit had started to gain traction. He called Brooks, his tone sharp. Brooks assured him that measures were in place to manage the situation, but Vaughn's unease lingered. The cracks in their carefully constructed facade were beginning to show. At the same time, Evelyn Carter, one of the key witnesses, struggled with her decision to stand against the system. Her hands trembled as she held her phone, ready to call Naomi with new information. Fear gripped her heart as memories of past threats resurfaced. Yet, her determination to fight for justice pushed her forward. She dialed Naomi's number, her voice shaking as she relayed details of another victim who might come forward. Naomi listened intently, her resolve hardening. She knew these testimonies could form the backbone of her case. She promised Alicia protection, urging her to stay strong. Hanging up, Naomi quickly contacted Reed to share the developments. They agreed to meet the new witness immediately, aware of the risks involved. Elsewhere, Vaughn convened a secret meeting with his inner circle. His voice was firm as he demanded loyalty and compliance. He assigned tasks to each member, instructing them to monitor Naomi's every move and discredit her through any means necessary. His gaze lingered on Linda Chase, who sat silently, a mixture of guilt and fear etched on her face. Vaughn knew she was wavering, but for now, her involvement was useful. Linda, however, felt the weight of her choices. As Naomi's investigation closed in, Linda's internal conflict grew. She recalled her past partnership with Naomi, the trust they had shared. Vaughn's threats haunted her, but so did the prospect of losing her integrity. Her mind swirled with doubt as she wrestled with her next move. Back at the FBI office, Naomi and Reed prepared for their meeting with a new witness, Mary Jenkins. Mary was visibly nervous, her eyes darting around the room as she recounted her experiences with Brooks and Vaughn's network. Her story painted a chilling picture of systemic corruption, fear tactics, and unchecked power. Naomi's expression hardened as she documented every detail, her determination fueled by Mary's courage. As the meeting concluded, Naomi received a message from an anonymous source. The cryptic note contained coordinates and a single word, evidence. Naomi hesitated, aware it could be a trap, but the possibility of finding crucial information was too significant to ignore. She and Reed quickly devised a plan, ensuring they had backup ready if things went south. The coordinates led them to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension as they approached, their senses on high alert. Inside, they discovered a hidden stash of documents, including financial records, emails, and photographs linking Vaughn and Brooks to illegal activities. The evidence was damning, but their celebration was short-lived. A sudden noise shattered the silence, and armed men emerged from the shadows. Reed signaled Naomi to take cover as gunfire erupted. The attackers were relentless, but Naomi and Reed's training kicked in. They maneuvered strategically, returning fire while trying to secure the evidence. Backup arrived just in time, forcing the assailants to retreat. Naomi's heart pounded as she clutched the files, knowing how close they had come to losing everything. Back at the FBI office, Naomi and Reed meticulously analyzed the recovered documents. The evidence revealed not only Vaughn and Brooks' direct involvement in corruption, but also implicated several high-ranking officials. The scope of the network was staggering, extending into politics, business, and law enforcement. Naomi's determination deepened as she realized the enormity of the challenge ahead. Meanwhile, Vaughn received word of the failed attack. His fury was palpable as he berated his subordinates for their incompetence. He issued new orders, escalating his efforts to silence Naomi and protect the network. Vaughn's desperation was evident, and it fueled his willingness to take increasingly drastic measures. Naomi, undeterred by the risks, called a press conference to reveal a portion of the evidence. She knew it was a calculated risk, but public awareness was crucial to protect the witnesses and prevent Vaughn and Brooks from covering their tracks. The conference was tense, with reporters firing questions and skepticism running high. Naomi's calm and confident demeanor shone through as she presented the facts, making it clear that the fight for justice was far from over. The press conference sent shockwaves through the city. Protests erupted, demanding accountability and transparency. Vaughn and Brooks faced mounting pressure as public outrage grew. Their allies began to waver, some distancing themselves to avoid being implicated. The network's foundation was starting to crumble, but Vaughn refused to back down. In a desperate move, Vaughn orchestrated a smear campaign against Naomi, accusing her of fabricating evidence and abusing her authority. The media frenzy intensified, and Naomi found herself under relentless scrutiny. Despite the personal attacks, she remained steadfast, focusing on the mission at hand. Reed worked tirelessly alongside Naomi, their partnership unshaken by the challenges. They identified new leads, tracked down additional witnesses, and continued building their case. The pressure was immense, but Naomi's resolve never wavered. She knew the stakes were high, and failure was not an option. As the tension escalated, Linda Chase faced a moment of truth. She contacted Naomi, her voice trembling as she confessed her role in Vaughn's schemes. Linda's information provided critical insights into the network's operations and Vaughn's next moves. Naomi's reaction was measured, recognizing the importance of Linda's testimony despite her betrayal. With Linda's help, Naomi and Reed planned a daring operation to apprehend Vaughn and Brooks. The operation required precision, secrecy, and unwavering commitment. As the day approached, the team prepared meticulously, knowing this was their best chance to bring the network to justice. The climactic operation unfolded with a mix of chaos and precision. Vaughn and Brooks were cornered, their attempts to escape thwarted by Naomi's strategic planning. The arrest was a turning point, sending shockwaves through the corrupt network and signaling a new chapter in the fight for justice. As Naomi stood in the aftermath, surrounded by her team, the weight of the battle settled on her shoulders. She knew the fight was far from over, but this victory was a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and unwavering dedication to the truth. The tension within the police department escalated as the corrupt officers realized their carefully constructed network was under siege. Vaughn and Brooks convened an emergency meeting with their closest allies, attempting to strategize a counterattack. Brooks' tone was sharp and commanding as he reviewed the files Naomi had unearthed. He recognized that the evidence, though not yet complete, was substantial enough to pose a significant threat to their operations. Vaughn, however, was less composed, pacing the room with visible frustration. Brooks decided to focus on discrediting Naomi publicly before she could solidify her case. They began orchestrating a smear campaign, planting stories about her alleged misconduct in previous investigations and questioning her integrity as an FBI agent. Vaughn suggested pulling strings with media contacts to amplify the narrative. "If we make her seem unreliable, her evidence won't hold weight," Brooks declared confidently. They assigned a subordinate to handle the dissemination of fabricated stories, confident that the public outcry would sway opinion in their favor. Meanwhile, Naomi's investigation continued to gain momentum. She met with Marcus Reed and Evelyn Carter to strategize their next moves. Marcus emphasized the need for airtight documentation to withstand any scrutiny. Alicia, emboldened by Naomi's determination, provided additional details about Brooks' past threats. Naomi's resolve hardened as she realized the extent of the system's corruption and the damage it had inflicted on countless lives. Simultaneously, Linda Chase's betrayal became a pressing concern. Reed uncovered evidence that Linda had been leaking information to Vaughn and Brooks. Naomi confronted Linda in a tense exchange, her words cutting and deliberate. Linda initially denied the accusations, but Naomi presented irrefutable proof. The confrontation culminated in Linda's reluctant confession, revealing the fear and manipulation that had led her to betray her colleagues. Naomi's anger was tempered by a newfound understanding of the pervasive culture of intimidation within the department. Linda's confession proved invaluable, as she provided key details about Vaughn and Brooks' operations. She disclosed the existence of a secure storage facility used to house incriminating documents and funds. Naomi and Reed quickly organized a covert operation to access the facility, knowing it could be the breakthrough they needed. They enlisted trusted colleagues to assist, ensuring the plan remained confidential. The operation unfolded with precision. Under the cover of darkness, the team infiltrated the facility. Naomi's heart raced as they located a hidden vault. Using Linda's access codes, they gained entry, uncovering a trove of evidence linking Vaughn and Brooks to illicit activities, including money laundering and human trafficking. Naomi photographed every document and secured digital copies, ensuring redundancy in case of retaliation. As the team prepared to exit, an alarm blared, signaling their presence. Vaughn's enforcers arrived swiftly, engaging Naomi's team in a tense standoff. The agents worked together seamlessly, neutralizing threats and escaping with the evidence intact. The adrenaline coursing through Naomi's veins was tempered by the knowledge that the operation had put them on Vaughn's radar. Back at the FBI headquarters, Naomi and her team analyzed the evidence, uncovering connections to influential figures outside the police department. The network extended into City Hall, implicating politicians and business leaders. Naomi's investigation had outgrown its original scope, now targeting systemic corruption at the highest levels. She briefed her superiors, who authorized the formation of a task force to pursue the case. As the task force began its work, Vaughn and Brooks escalated their countermeasures. They orchestrated a coordinated attack on Naomi's credibility, leveraging their media contacts to spread disinformation. Naomi's every move was scrutinized, and her past cases were re-examined for potential misconduct. The pressure mounted as colleagues began to distance themselves, wary of being associated with a potentially doomed investigation. Despite the backlash, Naomi refused to back down. She held a press conference to address the allegations, speaking with unwavering confidence. Her authenticity resonated with the public, many of whom began to see through the smear campaign. Evelyn Carter and other victims of the corrupt system publicly supported Naomi, sharing their stories and rallying community support. Vaughn and Brooks' desperation became evident as they resorted to more aggressive tactics. They attempted to intimidate key witnesses, including Alicia and Linda. Naomi responded by placing them under protective custody, ensuring their safety while continuing to build her case. She also intensified her efforts to expose Vaughn and Brooks' financial backers, targeting the root of their power. The investigation reached a critical juncture when Naomi discovered encrypted communications between Vaughn and a high-ranking city official. The messages detailed plans to destroy evidence and obstruct justice. Naomi's team decrypted the files, exposing the official's involvement and securing a warrant for their arrest. The arrest sent shockwaves through the political landscape, galvanizing public support for Naomi's mission. As the pressure mounted, Vaughn and Brooks' alliance began to fracture. Brooks accused Vaughn of mishandling their defense, while Vaughn blamed Brooks for underestimating Naomi. Their discord became a liability, creating opportunities for Naomi to exploit. She strategically leaked information about their infighting, further eroding their credibility. The climactic moment arrived when Naomi secured a wiretap on Vaughn's phone, capturing a conversation in which he admitted to orchestrating several of the crimes under investigation. The recording became the cornerstone of Naomi's case, providing irrefutable evidence of Vaughn's guilt. With the case against Vaughn and Brooks solidified, Naomi coordinated simultaneous raids on their known properties, seizing additional evidence and dismantling their network. The operation culminated in the arrest of Vaughn and Brooks, who were charged with a litany of crimes, including conspiracy, fraud, and abuse of power. The arrests marked a significant victory for Naomi and her team, but the battle was far from over. Naomi knew that the corruption extended beyond Vaughn and Brooks, and she remained committed to pursuing justice. As Naomi reflected on the journey thus far, She felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. The fight against corruption was arduous, but the victories along the way affirmed the importance of her mission. She resolved to continue her work, knowing that every step forward brought her closer to dismantling the system that had enabled such pervasive injustice. The unfolding of events was swift and unrelenting. The revelation of the hidden corruption network sent ripples through every facet of the system, and the resistance against Naomi intensified. Naomi sat at her desk, her mind replaying the moments from the previous ambush. The loss of critical evidence weighed on her, but she knew she couldn't afford to falter. Her focus shifted to the documents Mills had handed over. They were incomplete but hinted at an intricate web of financial fraud and abuse of power that extended beyond the police department. Every new detail revealed the depth of the rot. Meanwhile, Deputy Mayor Quinn paced his office, his anger barely concealed. Vaugh and Brooks' exposure had thrown a wrench in his carefully constructed network. He barked orders to his confidants, urging them to discredit Naomi before she could gather more evidence. Quinn knew the stakes were high. If Naomi succeeded, it wouldn't just be his career at risk, it would be his entire legacy. Naomi's investigation led her to an unassuming accountant named Edward, who had once handled the finances of Vaugh and Brooks. Edward's unease was evident as he recounted how he was coerced into falsifying records to hide illicit transactions. He handed Naomi a USB drive containing crucial data he had secretly copied. The drive's contents were damning, revealing a pipeline of funds channeled from city contracts to offshore accounts. Quinn's network was now aware of Edward's cooperation. That night, a black SUV followed him as he left his modest apartment. The vehicle's occupants were menacing figures tasked with silencing him. Edward, sensing danger, fled to Naomi's safe house. She welcomed him in, promising protection, but the incident highlighted the lengths Quinn's allies would go to protect their secrets. Within the police department, Brooks held a clandestine meeting with his loyalists. His frustration boiled over as he outlined their strategy. They would fabricate incidents to discredit Naomi, including planting evidence to frame her as a rogue agent. Brooks' confidence remained steadfast. He believed that manipulating public opinion would dismantle Naomi's credibility. Naomi's resolve was unshaken. Alongside Marcus Reed, she strategized their next move. Reed had uncovered a list of contractors tied to the illicit financial network. Each name on the list was a thread that could unravel the entire scheme. Naomi decided to confront one of the contractors directly, knowing it was a risk worth taking. Posing as a potential client, Naomi arranged a meeting with a contractor named Douglas. Their conversation was tense, with Douglas initially denying any wrongdoing. But when Naomi presented the evidence linking his firm to offshore accounts, Douglas cracked. He admitted to funneling money for Quinn and Brooks in exchange for lucrative city contracts. Douglas' confession was recorded, adding another piece to Naomi's growing case. The growing pressure on Quinn's network began to show. Internal conflicts erupted among his allies as fear of exposure spread. Some sought to cut deals with Naomi in exchange for leniency, while others doubled down, determined to protect their positions at any cost. The turning point came when Naomi received an anonymous tip about a warehouse used to store physical evidence of the network's activities. The tipster warned that the location was heavily guarded. Naomi and Reed decided to act swiftly, assembling a team to raid the warehouse. The raid was meticulously planned. As Naomi and her team approached the warehouse, they encountered resistance. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their presence a clear indication of the site's importance. Naomi directed her team with precision, ensuring minimal casualties as they secured the area. Inside the warehouse, the scope of the corruption was laid bare. Boxes of documents, ledgers, and hard drives filled the space, each containing evidence of fraud, bribery, and coercion. Among the items was a ledger detailing payments made to high-ranking officials, including Quinn. The discovery was a critical breakthrough, but Naomi knew it would only escalate the threats against her. Back at the FBI office, Naomi and Reed worked tirelessly to analyze the seized evidence. The connections between Quinn, Brooks, and their network became clearer with each passing hour. The data revealed how they exploited the city's resources for personal gain, all while silencing dissent through intimidation and violence. Quinn, now cornered, resorted to desperate measures. He orchestrated a smear campaign against Naomi, using his influence to spread false accusations through the media. Reports painted her as a power-hungry agent with a vendetta against the police force. The public's reaction was divided, with some questioning her motives while others rallied behind her. Naomi's allies within the community grew more vocal in their support. Evelyn Carter and Mary Jenkins, former victims of Mills and Brooks, organized a press conference to share their stories. Their bravery inspired others to come forward, strengthening Naomi's case and shifting public opinion in her favor. As the pressure mounted, Naomi's team discovered a critical vulnerability in Quinn's network. A whistleblower within the city's financial department provided documents linking Quinn to a shell company used to launder money. This evidence was the final piece Naomi needed to build an airtight case. Naomi's decision to go public with the findings was met with resistance from her superiors, who feared the political fallout. But she stood firm, insisting that transparency was the only way to hold the perpetrators accountable. In a televised press conference, Naomi presented the evidence, laying bare the extent of the corruption. The revelation sent shockwaves through the city, prompting immediate calls for Quinn's resignation and an independent investigation into the police department. Quinn's downfall was swift. He was arrested, along with Brooks and several other high-ranking officials. The network they had built over decades began to crumble, their secrets exposed for all to see. Naomi's relentless pursuit of justice had prevailed, but the cost was evident. As the dust settled, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The fight against corruption was far from over, but she knew she had taken a significant step toward dismantling a system that thrived on fear and manipulation. Her determination burned brighter than ever, fueled by the resilience of those who had stood with her. The battle for justice continued, but Naomi's unwavering resolve had proven that even the most entrenched systems of power could be challenged and brought to account. The city's fight for transparency and accountability had only just begun, and Naomi was ready to lead the charge. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as the prosecution and defense teams prepared their arguments. Naomi Harper sat at the edge of her seat, her gaze fixed on the defendant, Vaughn, whose expression wavered between feigned confidence and hidden dread. The battle that had consumed her life for months was reaching its climax, but Naomi knew that the danger had only intensified. From the defense's table, Vaughn's lawyer, a shrewd and calculating woman named Evelyn Grant, maintained a calm facade. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that Grant had something planned. Naomi's allies, including Marcus Reed, exchanged uneasy glances. They had come prepared with solid evidence, but this wasn't just about facts, it was about perception, and the defense was skilled at manipulating it. The prosecutor began the case by presenting the financial transactions that linked Vaughn to illicit activities. Each piece of evidence was laid out systematically, painting a picture of corruption and abuse. The audience murmured as emails, bank records, and testimonies were displayed. Vaughn's smirk faltered, but Grant's expression remained unreadable. As the prosecution called their first witness, Evelyn Carter, the room fell silent. Alicia's hands trembled as she took the stand, but her voice grew steadier with each word. She recounted her experience with Vaughn, the threats, the intimidation, and the moment she decided to fight back. Her testimony was powerful, evoking gasps and murmurs from the audience. Naomi felt a surge of pride and solidarity but remained cautious. Vaughn's network had a history of retaliating against those who spoke out. Grant's cross-examination was brutal. She questioned Alicia's credibility, insinuating that her account was exaggerated or fabricated. Alicia's composure wavered, but Naomi's steady gaze gave her strength. Alicia's determination to stand her ground won over many in the courtroom, but Grant's tactics left a seed of doubt in others. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the tension in the city was palpable. Protests and rallies filled the streets, with activists demanding accountability. Naomi knew that the outcome of this trial would ripple far beyond the courtroom. Vaughn represented not just an individual, but an entire system of corruption that had thrived unchecked for years. During a break in the proceedings, Naomi stepped outside to clear her mind. As she stood near the courthouse steps, a man approached her. His demeanor was nervous, and his eyes darted around. He introduced himself as a former associate of Vaughn's network, someone who had worked behind the scenes to cover up their operations. Naomi's instincts told her to be wary, but the man's desperation seemed genuine. He handed her a USB drive, claiming it contained incriminating evidence against Vaughn and his higher-ups. "This will expose everything," he said, his voice trembling. Naomi's heart raced as she pocketed the drive. She thanked him and watched as he disappeared into the crowd. The potential value of the evidence was immense, but she knew it could also be a trap. Back in the courtroom, the defense called their witnesses. Vaughn's allies painted him as a dedicated officer who had been unfairly targeted by those seeking to undermine law enforcement. They used coded language to appeal to biases, subtly framing Naomi and her team as radicals intent on dismantling the system. Naomi's frustration grew, but she kept her composure, knowing the trial was far from over. Later that evening, Naomi and Reed reviewed the contents of the USB drive. The files were extensive, detailing financial transactions, communications, and operations that implicated not just Vaughn but also key figures in law enforcement and local government. Among the names listed was Deputy Mayor Harold Quinn. The evidence was damning, but its authenticity needed to be verified. Naomi contacted a trusted forensic analyst, who confirmed the legitimacy of the files. The weight of the revelations hit Naomi like a tidal wave. This was bigger than Vaughn. The network's reach extended into the highest levels of power. She realized that exposing this would not only bring justice, but also put her and her allies in even greater danger. The following day, Naomi's team presented the new evidence in court. The prosecutor's confidence was evident as they introduced the USB's contents. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the files were displayed. Vaughn's expression shifted from smug to panicked, and Grant's calm demeanor finally cracked. Grant objected, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally and should be inadmissible. The judge called for a recess to deliberate, leaving the courtroom in suspense. Outside, Naomi's mind raced. She knew the defense would do everything possible to suppress the evidence, and she braced herself for their next move. During the recess, Naomi received a chilling message. A note had been left in her car, warning her to drop the case or face severe consequences. The threat was a stark reminder of the stakes, but it only fueled Naomi's resolve. She shared the note with Reed, who urged her to increase her security measures. As the trial resumed, the judge ruled that the evidence from the USB drive was admissible, citing its relevance and importance to the case. The defense's strategy began to unravel. The prosecution methodically connected the dots, linking Vaughn to a web of corruption that extended far beyond him. The turning point came when another whistleblower came forward. This individual, a former financial officer within the police department, corroborated the USB's contents and provided additional details about the network's operations. Their testimony was a bombshell, leaving the defense scrambling to recover. Grant's attempts to discredit the whistleblower were met with skepticism. The evidence was overwhelming, and the courtroom's mood shifted. Vaughn's allies in the audience exchanged nervous glances, realizing that their grip on power was slipping. As the trial neared its conclusion, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of Reed's unwavering support, Alicia's bravery, and the countless others who had risked everything to stand against injustice. The weight of their sacrifices pressed on her, but it also gave her strength. In her closing argument, the prosecutor emphasized the systemic nature of Vaughn's corruption. "This is not just about one man," they said. "It's about a system that allowed him to act with impunity. Today, we have the opportunity to hold that system accountable." The jury deliberated for hours, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. When they finally returned, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts. The room erupted in a mix of cheers and tears. Vaughn's face was a mask of defeat as he was led away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, the crowd celebrated the verdict. Naomi stood among them, a mixture of relief and determination washing over her. She knew this victory was significant, but it was only one battle in a much larger war. The fight against corruption and injustice was far from over, but Naomi was ready to continue the fight, no matter the cost. The courtroom buzzed with subdued murmurs as the judge's gavel came down, silencing the restless audience. Naomi Harper stood at the defense table, her presence commanding despite the intense pressure around her. Across the room, Captain Vaughn and Lieutenant Brooks sat stiffly, their lawyers whispering hurried strategies. This was the culmination of months of investigations, betrayals, and dangerous confrontations. Naomi knew there would be no turning back. The prosecution's opening argument was sharp and pointed, outlining the extensive evidence Naomi and her team had painstakingly uncovered. Financial records tied Vaughn and Brooks to a sprawling network of corruption, involving illegal dealings with gangs and the manipulation of city funds. Witness testimonies, led by Darrell Lawson and other victims, provided a damning narrative of abuse and exploitation within the system. As the evidence was presented, Vaughn's smug facade began to crack. His lawyer tried to discredit the witnesses, but the consistency of their stories and the mountain of documents proved difficult to dismiss. Brooks's expression grew darker with each passing hour, his usual air of confidence replaced by visible unease. Naomi's resolve strengthened as she watched them squirm under the weight of their lies. The prosecution rested its case, and the defense scrambled to paint Vaughn and Brooks as victims of a smear campaign orchestrated by Naomi. Their lawyer suggested that Naomi's ambition to rise through the ranks had motivated her to fabricate evidence and manipulate witnesses. The courtroom's tension rose as the defense leaned heavily on the betrayal by Linda Chase, who had provided initial information to undermine Naomi's credibility. But Naomi was prepared. When it was her turn to testify, she recounted the months of work that led to this moment. She detailed the threats, the ambushes, and the lives impacted by the corruption Vaughn and Brooks perpetuated. Her voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of the truth. She addressed the betrayal of Linda Chase directly, emphasizing how even someone coerced by fear could not obscure the overwhelming evidence against the accused. The turning point came when a piece of new evidence, decrypted from Vaughn's hidden files, was introduced. The encrypted emails directly linked Vaughn and Brooks to high-ranking city officials, exposing an even larger conspiracy. The courtroom gasped as Naomi's team presented this undeniable proof of collusion and cover-ups. Vaughn's lawyer objected vehemently, but the judge overruled, allowing the evidence to be entered into the record. As the trial progressed, the narrative shifted away from Naomi's motivations and toward the systemic corruption that Vaughn and Brooks represented. Evelyn Carter and Mary Jenkins, whose stories had been pivotal in exposing the abuse, delivered emotional testimonies that left the courtroom in stunned silence. Their bravery in confronting their abusers head-on inspired murmurs of support from the gallery. Behind the scenes, Naomi's team worked tirelessly to counter the defense's every move. Marcus Reed's absence weighed heavily on everyone, but his contributions to the case remained a guiding force. Naomi often found herself reflecting on his unwavering belief in justice, using his memory as fuel to push forward. As the trial neared its conclusion, tensions outside the courthouse reached a boiling point. Protests demanding justice for the victims of police corruption swelled, with demonstrators carrying signs and chanting slogans that echoed through the city streets. The public's outcry became impossible to ignore, adding pressure to the judicial process. Inside the courtroom, Vaughn's demeanor shifted as his lawyer called him to the stand. He painted himself as a scapegoat, claiming he had been following orders from higher-ups and was unfairly targeted. The performance was calculated, but Naomi's piercing gaze never wavered. She could see the fear behind his words. The prosecution's cross-examination dismantled Vaughn's narrative piece by piece. They highlighted the financial transactions, the cover-ups, and his direct involvement in violent suppression of dissent. Vaughn's attempts to deflect blame only served to expose his desperation. As the final arguments were made, Naomi felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The loss of Marcus, the betrayal of Linda, the countless lives harmed by Vaughn and Brooks's actions, it all culminated here. The jury deliberated for hours, leaving everyone in agonizing suspense. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom fell silent. The foreperson's voice rang clear as she read the verdict, guilty on all counts. The room erupted in emotion. Victims wept with relief, activists cheered, and even some officers who had supported Naomi's cause exchanged nods of affirmation. Vaughn and Brooks sat in stunned silence, their fate sealed. Outside, the atmosphere was electric. The protests transformed into celebrations as news of the verdict spread. Naomi stepped out of the courthouse into the sea of supporters. Alicia and Mary approached her, their gratitude evident in their tearful smiles. Naomi embraced them, feeling a rare moment of peace amidst the chaos. Later that evening, Naomi visited Marcus's grave. She placed a single white rose on the headstone, her thoughts heavy with his absence. "We did it, Marcus," she whispered. "But the fight isn't over." In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the trial were profound. City officials implicated in the conspiracy were forced to resign, and sweeping reforms were implemented within the police department. Naomi's suspension was lifted, and she was promoted for her relentless pursuit of justice. Yet she remained grounded, knowing that the work was far from complete. As she walked through the bustling streets of the city, now alive with renewed hope, Naomi felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. She had faced unimaginable obstacles and emerged victorious, but her journey was just beginning. The fight for justice would continue, and Naomi Harper would be at the forefront, ready to face whatever came next.